All right, so another type of inheritance pattern has to do with the sex chromosomes. So far we have been talking about the autosomes, which are basically your other chromosomes, like chromosomes 1 through 22. And then we said the 23rd set of chromosomes are your sex chromosomes. So in humans, we use the letter X and Y from the alphabet to designate the sex chromosomes for individuals. In other animals and other organisms, other letters of the alphabets is used. So it could be like an A chromosome or a D chromosome, or there's Z chromosomes. So it's just a letter that we use to kind of designate that chromosome. So I don't want you to get confused with the fact that, when we look at chromosomes, they look like the letter X when we draw them out as sister chromatids. So here we're not drawing out the shape of the chromosome, we're referring to the letter X. Okay, so in humans, females have what we call two X chromosomes, and the X chromosomes are a lot larger in size than the Y chromosome. So males have one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. So the Y chromosome is a lot smaller in size compared to the X chromosome. So if you think about it, a female is going to pass on to her children an X chromosome because that's all she has is two X chromosomes. A male can pass on either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome, right? Because that individual will go through meiosis to make gametes. The X and the Y will be pulled apart during meiosis into different daughter cells. So it's actually the males that determine the sex of the offspring because the offspring are either receiving the X from the father or a Y from the father. So the male gets to determine if the individual becomes a son or a daughter, right? Because of what they're inheriting through the sperm cells. Now, having said this, right, we typically recognize females as having two X chromosomes or males as having an X and a Y chromosome. More research has shown us kind of what it is about the Y chromosome that helps to determine the sex of the individual. So there's what's called the SRY gene, which refers to the sex determining region on the Y chromosome. So this is the gene on the Y chromosome that is responsible for the development of the testes. So it codes for the proteins that kind of initiate the development of the sex organs. There hasn't been a comparable gene that's been found on the X chromosome for females. So pretty much it's kind of like the presence or the absence of the SRY gene is kind of what determines the sex of an individual. So it's not necessarily the whole Y chromosome, but it's certain genes that are on the Y chromosome that helps determine the sex of the individual. Now, having said that, since we're dealing with genetics and we're dealing with whole chromosomes, we're still going to consider females as XX and males as XY. So let's look at what are called sex-linked inheritance. So because the X chromosome is a lot larger in size, it also is a lot more susceptible to having or carrying more genetic mutations. So typically when we talk about sex-linked genes, usually they're on the X chromosome. So there can be some that are, when we're talking about genetic disorders that are on the Y chromosome, but for the most part, they're going to be on the X chromosome because there's just so many more genes on there. So there's so many more opportunities for things to go wrong. So sex-linked genes a lot of times are also called X-linked when they're on the X chromosome. So for X-linked genes, we know females will have two X chromosomes, so they'll have two alleles. So a female can be homozygous or heterozygous for that character on the X chromosome. Males, on the other hand, only have one X chromosome. there's not a comparable gene on the Y chromosome. So what we kind of use this little phrase, whatever is on the X is expressed. So there's no way to hide whatever condition is on the X chromosome because there's not another allele. Males cannot be carriers for an X-linked genetic disorder, whereas females can be carriers for an X-linked genetic disorder. So let's look at an example of this. We have a case here where we've got red-green color blindness, and it says it's an X-linked recessive genetic disorder, and this is true. So I'm going to make big C and a little c. So it says it's X-linked and it's recessive. All right, so my lowercase c is going to be my red-green. I'll just put red-green color blindness, and my big C will be so-called normal vision. Once again, whatever you consider normal to be. All right, or normal there. Okay. So it says if a woman who is red-green colorblind. So it's a woman, so we're going to write out the two X chromosomes to show that it is a female. And it's saying who is red-green colorblind. So since red-green colorblind is controlled by a recessive allele, in order for her to be colorblind, she needs two little lowercase c letters. All right, so each X chromosome would have the allele for red-green colorblindness. If she had the dominant allele, then she would not be red-green colorblind. So we have her, and we've got a guy. What's Dad have here? So we got a man who is not colorblind. So for the man, we're going to put the X chromosome, and then we're going to write the Y chromosome. So with a man who is not colorblind, he's not colorblind, so he has normal vision. So we're going to write the big C. All right, I wonder, maybe I can use a different color here. Big C. All right, make that big so it's a little easier to tell. All right, so then we fill in our Punnett square. Oh no, went in here. Okay, so we got X with our big C. That's going to be here. We got X with our big C here. And then let me go back to my regular color here. And we're going to bring down our other X with our little c. X with our little c. And then these X's come straight down. Sorry, this is so messy looking here. And then our Y comes across, X with a little c and a Y. Okay. So what do we got here? So in this first block, we've got a female, two X chromosomes. They have the big C for normal vision, little c for red-green color blindness. So this individual is not colorblind, but they are a carrier for color blindness. What about this one? Another carrier for color blindness because they have the big C, so they've got normal vision, but they're a carrier for it. So if we're looking at just the daughters, right, the two X chromosomes, these are the daughters. None of the daughters will be colorblind, but they're all carriers for colorblind. What about the sons? The X and the Y represent our males. Whatever's on the X chromosome will be expressed, right? There's nothing comparable on the Y chromosome, so we're not putting any allele on the Y at all. So we got an X with a lowercase c, nothing on the Y, so they will show red-green color blindness. Same thing with this individual over here. They have the recessive allele for red-green color blindness. The Y doesn't have anything comparable, so once again, whatever's on the X is expressed for males, so they are red-green colorblind. So all of the sons produced by this couple will be colorblind. They'll have red-green color blindness. Okay? So keep on practicing these problems, X-linked problems, and hopefully they'll start to make sense to you. All right, let's move on to pedigrees. So pedigrees are a way that we can look at inheritance as well. We can look at what has already occurred and then try to backtrack to figure out how the inheritance or how the character is inherited or passed on through the generations. So when we look at a pedigree, we always look at the horizontal line as showing a union between two individuals. Squares are males, circles are females, and any line coming down refers to their children. So here we have one of their children, their son, got married to an individual over here from this family. So there's a union, and then they had two children. Any individual that is shaded in represents whatever trait or character you're looking at. So it could be a dominant one or it could be a recessive one. It doesn't matter. It's whatever you're looking for is that shaded in one. Okay. So that shows the inheritance pattern that you're trying to note. So in this case, the shaded in has to do with a recessive allele. So this individual here is homozygous recessive. Any individual that's shaded in is homozygous recessive. Anyone that's not shaded in would have to have a dominant allele. So you can backtrack and say, well, if this individual is homozygous recessive, they had to have inherited a recessive allele from both of their parents. So that means even though the parents do not show the disorder that we're looking at or the character that we're looking at, we know they have to have it in order to have this shaded in individual here. Okay, so sometimes if you're just looking at the phenotype of the parent and you don't know their genotype, you can kind of look and see, well, what do their children have, all right? In order to have that homozygous recessive genotype, that individual is a product of their parents, and they had to have the recessive alleles. So let's look at some pedigrees here. So I've got 3 pedigrees for you to look at. And if we start off with this one over here, it's asking you to determine if you think it is autosomal dominant, meaning not controlled by a sex chromosome, but just a dominant allele. Autosomal recessive, once again, not a sex chromosome, but a recessive allele, or X-linked. So this first one, you can kind of pause the video if you want and take a moment to think about it before I give you the answers. So for this one, since the only shaded in character is after a couple of generations and there's only one of them, for the most part, we're going to consider that it was probably a recessive genetic condition. Okay. For this one, we're looking at a lot more individuals that are shaded in, and they're both males and females. So most likely, this is a case where we're looking at a dominant controlled genetic condition that is being passed on. Because in dominance, whether you're homozygous dominant or heterozygous, you would show the condition. So it's going to be much more prevalent that you would see. And in this one, if you notice, the shaded in are only males. So most likely it's going to be X-linked because males are far more likely to be affected by an X-linked disorder than females are. And since the only ones shaded in are males, most likely it's an X-linked, probably recessive disorder. All right. So hopefully this helps your understanding. Once again, keep practicing.